Welcome to our discussion of the weekly article that went out Friday. This particular article is the third in a series entitled Who is Israel? And we're discovering in this article who is the bride. Christianity has a tendency to think of themselves as the bride, but as we're going to see, there's only one place in Scripture that describes the bride, and it's not Christians. With me today is my good friend JP. Why don't you say a word, JP, and let them know who you are, where you just say hi.
Shalom, everybody. Hello, everybody. Very interesting article. Learned some truths going through it. It's as we were discussing just before we started this call, it's amazing when relationship with Father is intricate and apparent. And if a person is able to let him lead, the places that he'll bring you in that relationship is just it's awesome. And to meet other people that are on the same kind of quest, that are willing to let go of some of their preconceived ideas of what they believe truth is, or what they believe that they know, if that can be let go, there's so much freedom in letting Father just lead us
and teach us in his ways.
Exactly. So again, as we are all, well, most of us, I think, whether in Christianity or not, I believe that most people are somewhat looking for sometimes the trials and tribulations that we go through. We've discussed this in the past. The filter can bring us to different things if we've got that filter of religion or Christianity. But I think that a lot of people are truly looking for, and if we're willing to take those steps, he's definitely going to show up. In this article here, you started with a couple of different scriptures, as always. Started explaining that their understanding was opened after the resurrection was the first scripture that was in Luke. Then you quoted Ephesians, which was where Paul is saying that we are members of his body, which interestingly enough, he also says in First Corinthians. He's very specific there about how the body works together, and certain body parts can't do other body parts work. And then the third one is in John, where John D. Mercer is talking about the bride and the bridegroom. Now, you've started the article with talking about the head and the body, and saying that there's no way that a body or a head is out there floating on its own. It's got to be attached to something. And so you started the article with that sort of picture that Messiah is our head and we are his body. And then you talked about koinonia. And throughout my research over the years, I've come to find out that when Hebrews would get together, or even in times of Messiah, when they would get together, their communion time or their fellowship time was a feast. It was a time of rejoicing. It was a time of joyfulness. It was a time, and unfortunately, over the years, the church has turned that kind of communion into a real ritual where we're looking at each other and saying, what we've done that was bad, and sort of judging ourselves. So koinonia back then was really fellowship. It was brotherhood. How important is that in and I'm going to use, I guess, the word of the bride. How important is that fellowship within the bride?
Well, we first have to define who is the bride. And this is quoted in the article. There's only one place in Scripture that says, here is the bride of the Messiah. And it describes it as a city that is coming from an elevated place. And in this city, it's interesting because there's only 12 gates that give access to the city, and each of the gates they're all made of pearl, one solid stone, and they each have a written over the doorway the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And the description in this city, that the imagery used is not a brick and mortar as has been advanced in all the illustrations of it, but of people. These are the Hebrew people who keep the 10 words of the Father. They are the bride. And as you mentioned in that article where John the Immerser quite plainly points to Yeshua and says, behold the bridegroom. So we've got this wedding that's going to take place, and Yeshua is the bridegroom, and there's no precedent in Scripture for someone to marry themselves. So if we who keep the 10 words of the Father and manifest those words in our behavior the way Yeshua exampled, we become his body. Shaul, the Hebrew apostle Paul, in Ephesians 5, speaks of this relationship, and he says, when I speak of the marriage relationship, where the two become one, or echad together, he says, what I'm speaking of truly is the relationship between Yeshua and his body. And as you mentioned, the body, the head doesn't float around apart from the body. It's all one unit. So when we're looking at these descriptions in Scripture, we need to make it clear to ourselves who the bridegroom is. And if we're part of the body of the bridegroom, hello, that means we're the bridegroom, and you can't be the bridegroom and the bride at the same time. And within the kingdom of Yahweh today, there are two factions. There are those who have recognized Yeshua as the Messiah of Yahweh, and there are those who keep the 10 words of the Father, and they do it purposefully, but they haven't yet understood that Yeshua is that Messiah. However, they're looking for him every day. And it's a recognition that there are other people in the kingdom, and at the point of the wedding ceremony, in the next article called The Covering, we explore the chuppah, which is in a Hebrew marriage ceremony. It's taking place under the a covering, and which is called the chuppah. And we, as the body of Yeshua, are covering the bride until the day when Yeshua is revealed to them. Right now, they're kind of blinded by the fact that Yeshua is the Messiah, primarily because of all of the commentaries of Christianity that have come out, insisting that, you know, people go over there and try to convert Jews to Christianity, which is just a mess in itself. But these true disciples of Yahweh who keep his words all through the Tanakh, which has been renamed the Old Testament, Yeshua consistently speaks about he's not going to abandon these people who are his family, who keep his words. Now, other Jews who have become absorbed into the world and they don't keep the words of Yahweh, that's not who we're talking about. We're talking about the remnant that has always been Yahweh's people who remain close to him by keeping his words. But on the day of the wedding, Yeshua will be revealed to them as that Messiah, and then they will receive him and become ichad with the Father as we are today. And that's what's being described in this image of the city of Jerusalem.
That was an amazing piece of information. I've been around Christianity for 23 some years, 20 odd years. And it doesn't matter who I've listened to over the years or what I've heard, the confirmation is always that we're the bride. I mean, that's what I've heard throughout all the years. And then to read it at something like this and to see that, and to see that, you know, scripture pretty plainly explains it. It's a pretty amazing thing that nobody's really stumbled on it before, or at least the people that I've listened to over the years, I've not heard that.
Well, part of the reason is because people have a tendency to get all caught up in emotion. And this scenario of being the bride is a very romantic, appealing, enticing picture that in the emotion that's swirling around within us as we contemplate it, it just seems reasonable that would be, you know, who we are. But that's not what the scripture says. And these words mean things. I mean, they're given to us for a purpose. And that's to educate us on who Yahweh is, who his nature, what his nature is, and how we're to function in this realm of his spirit.
So let's talk a little bit more about, you just mentioned a minute ago about one flesh. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because that was another part of the story that, or part of the article that you said. Actually, before you mentioned about the one flesh, you talked about mystery and what mysteries were, according to, according to scripture, or according to what in the article, if I'm not mistaken, you explained mystery as knowledge that is not humanly known. Is that correct?
It is an understanding that is revealed by Yahweh when we're ready to receive it. It's, people often ask me if I conduct a Bible study, and I don't, because that's not what Scripture is for. It's not just to read like you'd read a book. It is to confirm what we're hearing in spirit from the Father is actually His voice, because there's a lot of voices out there. And as we attune our ear to hearing His voice, what we're hearing will be confirmed and validated in Scripture, and usually several times over. And that's what we need to look for when we're going through Scripture, is that first we need to hear His voice speaking to us. JP, you expressed a revelation that you had just today about hearing His voice. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
I got up this morning. I'll share the story exactly as how it happened. I got up this morning and I've been having issues with my back. It's an old injury that cropped up a few months ago, and this is the first time that it doesn't heal pretty much right away. So this morning, when I went to prayer, to my time, my back was hurting a lot. So I ended up speaking with Father, asking him if I did anything wrong, because Scripture says that if we're obedient to Him, that we'll be prosperous and we'll be in good health, and we'll be, and in my perception of things, I'm following Father as much as I can. So I'm here and I'm on my knees, and all of a sudden, now I've had quite a few experiences throughout my life, spiritual experiences. This is the first time ever that I've heard His voice so clear. The dialogue was really from outside. It wasn't like, sometimes, am I talking to myself? Am I answering myself? It was a different experience this time. And He started telling me that it doesn't matter what I'm going through, that He's going to be with me. And that my purpose right now at this point is just to share His nature with people. About 3 years ago, I had an experience coming home from work one day through this walk, and He told me that it is better to be of a pure heart than to be right. And that really changed me, because I used to be one of these guys that was quite judgmental when it came to Christianity and religiosity and doing the right thing. So my conversations then changed. Even with my wife, we'd have discussions sometimes, and she noticed that there was a change in my conversation, because I wasn't as forceful, or I wasn't as criticism. I didn't criticize as much. I didn't force the issues as much. I didn't try to get her to understand my point of view or my way of seeing things. It was more about having a discussion and letting her speak, and letting her speak what she needed to speak, and just moving on from there. And then this morning, it was just sort of a bit of a confirmation from then, saying, just share my nature. A few years ago, it's better to have a pure heart than to be right. Now it's just share my nature. I got up from there, I went upstairs, I went to bed, I asked Father about my back. I got up, a few minutes later, my pain was gone. The pain was gone.
Yeah.
Now, I went outside. We got 3 feet of snow here yesterday, so I went outside and shoveled what I needed to shovel. I cleared the garage, and did a few other things. The pain did come back, but I was able to do what I needed to do.
And you
And
said
this
that
morning,
when the pain did come back, it wasn't as intense.
correct. That is correct. Also, it wasn't as bad. It's not been as bad this whole day. But it just went back to this morning when he says, it doesn't matter what you're going through, I'll be with you.
Hallelujah.
And then this whole experience happened.
And
So
that is what you're relating is the mysterion, or the mystery of communing with the Father. And this is what Paul was trying to get across in Ephesians 5 when he said that when I speak of the marriage relationship, I'm speaking a mystery, because I'm really speaking of the relationship between Yeshua and his body. And in the marriage relationship, as far back as Genesis, it says that a man shall leave his mother and father and shall cleave to his wife. The Hebrew word for cleave that's translated as the English cleave is davak. Davak, the pictorial image that, Hebrew was a language of pictures before it became formalized into words. And the picture image of Hebrew for davak is two sticky mud balls slapped together and fashioned so that there's no seam anymore. The two become completely one. And you can't, and even though through the natural eye, you're looking at two individual entities, the way Spirit looks at this marriage is they are one flesh, not one spirit, but one flesh. And that's the mystery that we need to begin to look and see these words in Scripture through the eyes, the Hebrew perspective that they're written from. We have to continually remind ourselves that all of the books, every word in all these books in what we call the Bible, were all written by Hebrews, influenced by this Hebrew culture they grew up in, which produced a unique Hebrew perspective and was primarily addressed to other Hebrews who understood the nuances of this Hebrew language. And so the mystery that we see with Yeshua as the head of his body is that we are one flesh with him. And because we're ichad with him, we have cleaved to him. And this is the relationship that Paul is speaking of with the marriage.
well, I can just say that, with all the experiences that I've had over the years, this one was a little different, and we've talked over the years about revelation and stuff like that, and I really had a different kind of experience this morning. It really settled me that he's there. I knew, but there was just a settling this morning that, okay, this is really real.
There's a difference between head knowledge and actually experiencing, this realm of the Spirit that is exclusively Yahweh's.
How you mentioned that? How do we navigate that? Like, how? I know that we're a bit off the topic of the bride, but since we're here, how do we navigate that head knowledge with spirit stuff? Like, how do we navigate that?
The same way Yeshua exampled to us to do it. And he said that he didn't do anything unless he first saw the Father do it. And he didn't speak anything unless he first heard the Father speak it to him. And that's the relationship we have to develop with the Father. It doesn't come overnight. It comes through many years of trial and error, but continuing to push, to pursue, to diligently seek after truth, because from cover to cover of the Bible, we're promised by Yahweh that if we seek him with all of our heart and with all of our might, he will be found of us. And he will begin to reveal himself to us. It's not something that he just drops on you all at once and you become this other person, but it becomes life to us. What happened to you this morning, JP? It's you walked away from that, and by your own words, it's different because now it's life to you, and it becomes intrinsic to how you behave and how you start to listen for that voice again. You know, there was a one time in my life that I got into a bunch of mess, and I turned to the Father and I snapped at him, and I said, "Why didn't you tell me this was going to happen?" He said, "Harold, I've been talking to you all along, son. You just need to slow down and stop and listen." And that's truly what we need to do, to be able to hear that still small voice that's down inside of us. And it's not necessarily, I've had that experience that you talked about where you every fiber of your being knows that the Creator's speaking to you. Doesn't make any difference whether it's internal, external, you just know. And it's that knowing that it is our compass. They're just, after a while, when you're speaking with him, you just know. And he really doesn't have to say a lot. You just know. It becomes life to you. In John 17:3, Yeshua says, this is life eternal, to know the Father and the one whom he sent. As we come to know him, we come to know his nature. And then he shows us how to manifest that nature. And we're constantly measuring what he's saying to us against the life of Yeshua, because he is the standard by which we measure everything. And you're right, we've gotten off the topic of the bride, but I think what we're investigating here is essential for a lot of people to hear.
Yeah, true. I interestingly enough, I was sort of going to bring it back to the bride, because now if we're understanding now this ahad that we're having with Father, and that we're walking like our Messiah, that means that we're presently the bridegroom trying to woo the bride. So is it possible that the interactions that people are going to have following Messiah are going to bring the and I'm going to use the word Jews to a wanting to know the same God? Or there's a scripture that says, when the time of the Gentiles is done, or does that have any bearing with the bride coming to the bridegroom?
That part of the mystery is not delineated in Scripture anywhere. It's mentioned, but it's not defined where we can know exactly how that's to take place. I personally, I believe that the circumstances are going to evolve whereby, you know, the Hebrew family of Yahweh has been persecuted throughout history by the rest of the world.
The things that have happened to that people it's atrocities. It's unbelievable what that people has been through.
And most of those atrocities have come under the banner of Christianity. Whether you start with the Crusades, or even though the Crusades were meant to free Jerusalem from the Muslims, what in reality what happened was the Crusaders were more intent on this apocalyptic idea of preserving the city of Jerusalem, and particularly the structure that was there more than the people. They treated the people very poorly, and then you gravitate through the Inquisition, which the Catholics took up where the Romans left off, and you get into modern day the Holocaust, and all of these atrocities that were directed to the Jews were all done under the banner of Christianity. Hitler considered himself to be a Christian, which is why when you go to Israel today and you get outside of the tourist traps that are there and you start talking with people, they'll tell you, if you can get close enough to them, that they wish the Christians would just leave, give them the money and just leave. But how this is going to evolve, like I said, is not delineated. But personally, I think the circumstances of the world are going to come against the Jews again, where they're isolated, and it will be those of us who have embraced the life of this Hebrew Yeshua who will stand with them and take the blows with them, that they will look and see these what they consider righteous Gentiles, but they will see the Messiah through our behavior, replicating who he is in this earthly realm.
And then again, then making them the bride coming towards the bridegroom.
Exactly. And the Father will intervene on the circumstantial, the earthly part, to such an extent that this remnant of righteous Hebrews will see the Messiah in his body being replicated on the earth, and it will be through that this ichad of oneness that they will begin to take advantage of that, as we have, and that will consummate that marriage. What you're seeing in that image of the city, the New Jerusalem, is the consummation of the fulfillment of that marriage in that kingdom, because while the gates of the 12 gates, it's the only way to enter into the city is through one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The walls between the gates are made up of a myriad of stones, which is a myriad of other people that aren't necessarily ethnic Hebrew. And it's under the walls, not the gates, but under the walls where a foundation is laid. And in each foundation, you have the names of the 12 Hebrew apostles. They are our connection to this remnant of Hebrews who, this city is a Hebrew city. It's the kingdom of Yahweh. And in the center of it is the most purest of light that shines out from this city. And this is the overall covenant. You know, there's many covenants made in scripture, but this is the overall covenant of Yahweh to have this relationship of Echad with his family. And anyone can become part of the kingdom, part of his family, by coming into, by keeping the 10 words that, you know, that puts you in the center of the kingdom. You become a citizen of the kingdom of Yahweh, as mentioned in Ephesians. But it's not a kingdom. Yeshua tells us in Luke 17 that it's not a kingdom that comes by observation. You can't see it with the naked eye. It's this mystery of that the kingdom of Yahweh is within those who comprise the family of Yahweh.
So the kingdom is a bit of what I experienced this morning, that inside voice.
Correct. We are now the temple. You know, the temple, the reason it was destroyed was because it had no reason for existence anymore, because we have become those living stones of that city. And we are the ones who are carrying, you know, a piece of the temple, each one of us. We don't comprise the whole temple individually, but we each have responsibility for a corner of the temple. And when the Father sees us, he sees that temple. And he sees that, you know, all of those sacrifices that were done in the Tanakh were there because the people had been separated from the Father. And this was how that separation was mitigated to a certain degree, so that they could continue to be in his presence, although externally.
Would he have used that because other cultures were doing the same thing?
Say that again.
Would he have instructed them to do sacrifice and offerings and all those kinds of things because other cultures around them were doing the same thing?
The other cultures were not doing the same thing. It may from just an observational point of view, it may have seemed as such, but their sacrifices were to other gods. The sacrifices of Yahweh that he instituted was so that the Hebrew people could come into the presence of this most brilliant of light and not be consumed. You know, Yahweh is a consuming fire. And there's two things that happen when you get into a consuming fire. One, you're either burnt up, or two, you become pure, because the way you separate impurities from the pure is you put it under a fire, and the impurities rise to the surface where they can be seen and dealt with. You know, the reason people find themselves in what they would consider adverse circumstances, it's because it's within those adverse circumstances that our true nature rises to the surface and exposes itself in different behaviors that are not part of the kingdom, that are not part of the nature of Yahweh. And so the sacrifices were put in the beginning. You know, one of my favorite verses is Jeremiah 7, 20 and 21. And it says, when Yahweh is speaking to the family of Israel, and he says, when I brought you out of Egypt, did I require of you burnt offerings and sacrifices? He said, no. I said, obey my voice that it might go well with you. In Genesis 26:5, when Yahweh is speaking to Isaac about why he chose Abraham to be the instrument through which his promises would come, it's because he said, first of all, he obeyed my voice, and he kept my statutes and commandments and laws, ordinances. And this was 430 years before Mount Sinai. How did he do that? How did he know what those were? It's because he developed a relationship with Yahweh. He sought truth and was not satisfied with anything less than the pure truth. And it was in that pursuit of truth that he learned of the nature of Yahweh and kept his words. His words that were given at Sinai, the only words given by spirit to men were these 10 words, cast in stone. And those 10 words, because the kingdom has now come from without to within, those words are now written on our hearts instead of cast in stone. And this is how it's in his 10 words that as we keep them, as we explore what all of the words in those 10 actually mean from a Hebrew perspective, and then keep them from that Hebrew perspective, we become acquainted with the nature of spirit. And as we keep those words, the longer we keep them and the further we continue to pursue truth, he reveals himself to us. And we find that his nature permeates our being because he is now within.
So I'm assuming that when Abraham was called, we were speaking a minute ago, and it sort of brought me that question sort of came to mind, that he must have grown up surrounded by certain beliefs and traditions and possibly other gods also.
Well, the book of Yasher, which is mentioned in scripture, speaks of Abraham being brought up in the time of Nimrod and all these other gods that the Hebrews were worshiping at the time, and that his father was actually a sculptor of these other gods. That's how he made his living. And Abraham, he knew there was a disconnect between what was actually truth and what he was seeing going on before him, and he left. He left his father and all of that behind to pursue truth. So initially, you know, he's like everybody else. The way you come to know truth is if you seek it with all of your heart and with all of your might. And those who do will find it. And they will find that his name is Yahweh.
Right, right. So from Abraham, which was relational, Father spoke to him personally, directly, told him what to do, created covenants with him. And then that went through Isaac, it went through Jacob. They also heard him. They also interacted with him different times. And then through Joseph, and then ending up in Egypt. And
now see, here comes with Joseph, we find a disconnect, because the reason that the Hebrews wound up in Goshen in Egypt was because there was a famine in the land. And Joseph's father saw that his son had become this principal in the Egyptian administration at the time. And he left the land to go live in Goshen, where there was Joseph had stocked up, you know, food, grain, enough for everybody. And but in reading the words very carefully, we find that Yahweh did not instruct Jacob to leave the land of Canaan to go to Egypt. He did that on his own. But
right.
even in his own determination, the father still provided, and eventually when they were under such torturous slavery, and they were calling out to the father, he heard their cries, the scripture says, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, and he redeemed them out of that place of slavery and led them to freedom ultimately in Canaan.
Right, right. Now, that's a great segue, because in the article, The Bride, you also talk about covenant. You explain there that there are not two covenants, that there's only one. Could you re-explain that?
Well, simply, there's there like I said earlier, there are many covenants in Scripture, but we're speaking about the overall overarching covenant that was Yahweh's covenant that he made with himself, because he couldn't swear by anything higher, and so that man would not corrupt it. And that covenant was to redeem his family out of the death and the darkness that they had been consigned to by Adam's disobedience. And he provided a kinsman redeemer to the house of Israel to be the instrument through whom that redemption came, and that was Yeshua. And so what we find is the promise of the covenant in the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, what's renamed the Old Testament, and then the fulfillment of that covenant in the Messianic writings, what's been renamed the New Testament. And we see the fulfillment of that covenant first within Yeshua himself. And then the first thing that he did when he was resurrected, he appeared to the disciples who were locked away in this room for fear of the Pharisees coming to kill them as they had Yeshua. And the first thing he did was he breathed on them and said to them, receive the breath of life. Now, there's only two places in Scripture where Spirit breathed on men. At this point, Yeshua was resurrected and he was Spirit. The first was with Adam in the garden, and the Father breathed life into him. And the second was with Yeshua, with the disciples in that room, and he breathed on them and they received it, which was the forerunner to Shavuot, the Feast of Shavuot, which came 50 days later. And the breath of life was then spilled out upon all of those, first on the 120 who had been waiting on Yahweh, and then any of the others who were present there who would partake of that. And it said in that day, when that happened on Shavuot, that there were 3,000 that were added to the disciples of the way. And in those days, they only counted the men. So that's not counting the women and the children. And then a few days later, another 5,000 were added in a day. Again, just counting the men. So you had, anywhere, well, you had 8,000 men plus all their families. I mean, you had quite a group of people that when they saw what had happened to those 120, it must have been something physical that people could see, because they rushed to them to embrace that breath of life. And it's the same breath of life that we are taking advantage of today by keeping his 10 words, and receiving Yeshua for who he said he was, and manifesting those words in the example of life that he gave us. And we are part of this kingdom.
I'm going to use the word eternally grateful that I have had the pleasure of having the experience to meet him. And my joy is that if ever I have the opportunity to share him, I don't know if I've shared this story with you or not, but last year I ended up having an interaction with a former coworker of mine. We were having a discussion. She ended up coming to my office, and we were sitting down, and we ended up talking about spirit. We ended up talking about religion a little bit, belief, and spirit. And I proceeded to explain to her that what is missing for a lot of people is that encounter, is that encounter with the Father. And I said, a lot of people believe that he exists. A lot of people say that they believe in God, but what they're really saying when they say this is that they believe that God exists, but they've got no experiential interaction. And she started crying. And she said, I was praying about that this morning. Literally praying about that this morning. So she confessed some sins that she thought were sins, told by the church. But so she shared a few things, and then she said something that was really interesting. She said, you've got a mighty ministry, which for me is not, and she says, you're going to be used mightily by God. And I said, well, I have a bit of a different take on that. I said, I know we can use our friends, but I says, I don't like to use that term. I said, so what I prefer saying was that today I introduced you to my friend. And if you want, now you can have a relationship with him also.
You see, that's the very thing that Yeshua said to his disciples. He said, no more do I call you my disciples, but my friends, because we're on equal footing with Yeshua. Yes, he's the elder brother. And yes, he is worthy of all the praise and accolades and adornments that we can give him for what he did, because he was the initial instrument that Yahweh used to break through, if you will, into this realm of being personally involved in a relationship with the Creator. But we are all on equal footing. Yeshua said, "You are my brothers." You know, we are in Echad, not only with Yahweh, but with one another. And there's no hierarchy in spirit, in spite of what other religions have tried to make us believe. We're all equal. There's no male or female. There's no Jew or Greek. There's no rich or poor. That we are all one. And until we see that we're all one, you know, there'll always be division among men concerning the kingdom. Another thing that I've noticed in Scripture is that there is no title given to a person as a minister. There is, in Ephesians 4, it says that there are apostles and prophets and evangelists, pastors and teachers. And whereas Christianity has made these things offices or titles, or in calling them ministers of such, that's not what the Scripture says. The original writings say it's their functions within the body. In the same way you have an eye that functions one way and an ear that functions another, but they're still part of the same body, and they're given as gifts so that the saints might do the work of the ministry, which is, as you said earlier, advancing the nature of Yahweh to others, that they might see this kingdom that we're talking about.
I don't know where she's at now. I've switched jobs. I'm hoping that she was able to find something or experience something. But that, I think that brings us to our time. I've been doing about an hour, I guess. We were off and on the subject of the bride. Please go read the article. There's connections there and clips to other articles and other scripture and things like that, so you get a bit of picture. This is just an overview, and it's always a pleasure here.
It is a pleasure. And if you have any questions that you would like to ask me about, my email address is at the bottom of every article that you can find on the website. And so until next time, shalom.